All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's do a little recap of the NFL for the previous week. I believe we have just wrapped up week 12. If I'm not mistaken, yes, we just wrapped up week 12 going into week 13. It is the final. We're down the stretch, as they like to say in the NFL. Teams are starting to solidify themselves as division leaders, playoff teams, and some teams are in the hunt trying to make a push to make a wild card spot. So we'll start off with the Thanksgiving games. I had Detroit picked to beat Green Bay, and that was incorrect, which I'm very happy about. Um, I was watching this game with some friends, and Green Bay won the toss, elected to receive the ball, and I made the comment that's a bold move to in today's NFL to win the toss and take the ball, especially when your offense has struggled as much as Green Bay's have in early in games, and that was a great call because first play from scrimmage was a 53-yard completion from Love to Watson, and the offense really played pretty well. Jumped out to two early offensive touchdowns, something they've struggled to do throughout the majority of the season. Defense got a score in there, and we were up. We were at 20 points before the first quarter was over, I believe. So it was awesome to see a fast start, and then they played well enough and held them off long enough to get a win. So I'm very happy about Green Bay. Green Bay is one of those teams that is in a prime position to sneak into the playoffs. Not that I think they can do much damage, but uh, it'd be nice to make the playoffs. It's nice to see the development of Jordan Love and the young receivers, and starting to see those guys get on the same page. They've got starting to establish those connections, and really they're starting to play better. They're starting to play well together, and it's a great opportunity for the team. It's either the youngest or second youngest offense in the league. It's one of the cheapest offenses in the league. And after this year, because currently this year they have a $40 million dead cap hit from Aaron Rodgers' contract, that will be off the books next year, and that will free up a ton of cap space and potentially could open up the door for them to um, maybe address the offensive line in free agency or the draft, and potentially bring in another weapon. Um, whether it be at the running back position or wide receiver, tight end position. But I think they've, I think they have themselves in a good position to improve over the next couple of years. And if they make the playoffs this year, in essentially it's not a rebuild, but it's like a restart year. So our reset year with Love being the first year starter, they could be in a good position to set themselves up for a decent amount of success over the next 4 to 5 years. But Green Bay pulled the upset, probably the biggest upset of the week. They were 8.5 point underdogs, and they won outright 29-22 over Detroit. Next, we had Dallas hosting Washington. This was just a pure thumping of a game. It was um, Dallas through the first half. They really didn't pull ahead too much. I mean, I believe it was 20-10 at halftime, and then the late in the third quarter, early fourth quarter, Dallas really poured it on and opened it up. Uh, Big thing to note from this game is that Deron Bland broke the single season record for pick sixes. I know this has been a highly talked about topic. Personally, uh, so when it comes to interceptions, I don't want to discredit what he's done because he's done something that's never been done before. He has five pick sixes in a single season, and I mean, Deion Sanders was one of the best to ever play the game, and he had nine pick sixes in his career, and this guy has five in a season. So it it can't be ignored what he's doing, but I'll say the same thing about this situation that I said about Stephon Diggs. Was it Stephon? No. Trayvon, their corner. I got their brothers. So when he had his, I believe, 11 interceptions a couple years ago, and everyone was talking about how good he was, I brought up like, hey, if he's getting that many interceptions, number one, it tells me quarterbacks are not scared to throw the ball in his direction because because when Richard Sherman was at the height of his career, you didn't throw the ball to his side of the field because you knew he was going to get it. Same thing with like Darrelle Revis. Darrelle Revis didn't have a ton of picks or pick sixes because he shut his side of the field down, and quarterbacks didn't throw that way. And that was the comparison I made with Diggs because quarterbacks weren't scared to throw at him. Yes, he was getting interceptions, but he was also giving up a ton of yards, and quarterbacks continued to go at him. And another thing is you have to consider who is throwing the ball with these interceptions. So of the 5 pick sixes, the best quarterback he's got a pick six off of is Matthew Stafford. And the rest have been, I mean, one is Daniel Jones. We know he's not a great quarterback. Obviously, one against Sam Howell. I believe he had one against Mac Jones. Um, and then I'm not sure who the others were. I'd have to look at their schedule. But again, like I said, it is. Let me pull up the stats. I want to get this right. So his interception touchdowns, let me find them. Obviously, one against Sam Howell, one against Bryce Young, rookie, not a good quarterback. Matthew Stafford, Mac Jones, and Daniel Jones. So, and he did pick off Mac Jones twice, and the other lone interception was Tommy DeVito. So, and I believe Tommy DeVito was in the game the second time the Giants played. They may have not been, but either way, like he's not. I don't want to discredit what he's done because it is a record and it is impressive. But on the flip side of that, I would be more impressed if he were picking off guys like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, like top quarterbacks. I mean, even Jalen Hurts. So Brock Purdy, because they played Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts, and they didn't intercept either one of those guys. So the I need to see something against those top quarterbacks before I really think is he before he is at the level that the hype is. I don't think he's lived up to the hype yet. There's a lot of hype around him. He could turn out to be a phenomenal corner. He could be a great one. I think it's too early to tell, but right now most of his numbers are against subpar quarterbacks. So for me, I'm still pumping the brakes on that. But Dallas very handily beat Washington. I think they haven't beat a team with a winning record, um, and the teams they've played with losing records they've obviously blown out. Minus the Cardinals. The Cardinals pulled the upset on them. So they're about to be in a stretch where they're going to be playing teams with winning records almost every week. So at least coming into the game with winning records. I don't know how they'll be coming out, but Dallas played very well on Thanksgiving. To wrap it up, Seattle was hosting San Francisco. San Francisco thoroughly manhandled Seattle. We got 2 of those 3 right. We had Green Bay picked to lose, so that was our lone mistake. Friday, we had the New York Jets hosting the Miami Dolphins. This was not a great game. The most exciting part of this was Tua threw a pick six right before halftime. They got the ball back, threugh another pick, and just crazily, Jets threw a 100-yard interception return for a touchdown right before halftime. And I might have talked about all this when I made my video for the picks, but it's just still worth going over. So for Sunday's games, we had Pittsburgh picked to beat Cincinnati. This was Pittsburgh's first 400-yard game in like 58 games. Coincidentally, it's the first game since they fired Matt Canada. So Pittsburgh's offense did put up yardage, but they really didn't put up very many points. I think this was like I'm not sure what the final score of this game was, but it was a low-scoring game. Neither offense looked particularly well. Pittsburgh's defense came up big. Final score here 16-10 Pittsburgh. So they still got some things to work through. We had Houston we had Houston hosting Jacksonville. I had Jacksonville picked to win. Houston missed a field goal, I think before halftime, and then going in, and then at the end of the game, either one, which could have helped them win the game, and they or tie the game at least, and they lost to Jacksonville. Jackson now has a fairly strong hold on the division lead, and Houston, I believe they're currently in um, contention for a wild card spot, but ultimately, so they're one spot out of the playoffs. They have a tied record with Indianapolis, but I think Houston is ultimately going to fall out of the playoff spot because Denver's on a hot streak and they play Houston this week. If Denver wins, that's going to give them the tiebreaker over Houston. And I believe Denver will also play Indianapolis later in the season. That could give them the tiebreaker over that. Uh, with with Cleveland having quarterback issues, if Denver and Cleveland end up tied, Denver will have the tiebreaker over Cleveland. So um, Denver is in a prime spot to make a late season push and get into the playoffs. That's a team to watch for over the next 4 or 5 weeks as we end the season. Um, Next, we had Indianapolis playing Tampa Bay. I had Indianapolis picked to win. They did so. I had New Orleans picked to beat Atlanta. New Orleans was the favorite. Atlanta pulled the upset. Um, Nothing really much to talk about here. Just the terrible NFC South being terrible. Um, I had the New England Patriots picked to beat the New York Giants, and Tommy DeVito orchestrated a late push in the game to allow New York to win. Bill Belichick is pretty much going to be out the door this offseason, so that's disheartening to see because he's been a staple in the NFL for the last 20 plus years with the Patriots. So to see him either not there or on another team will be it'll be difficult to see, but it's probably going to happen. I had Tennessee picked to beat Carolina. This did in fact happen. Carolina, in fact, fired their head coach um, on Monday or maybe Tuesday. I'm not sure which day, but they did fire their head coach. Ultimately, I think that was a mistake. You fired him halfway through the first season, and there's reports now that the original plan was for Carolina to draft C.J. Stroud, but the plans changed. They moved up to number one, took Bryce Young, and it wasn't who the coach wanted. And now you fired the coach and in the process to get that trade, you traded away DJ Moore, which was your best weapon. You traded away any chance of that young quarterback being successful by taking away his best option, and now you're pinning it all on the coach because the team's not winning. And um, I mean, there's even reports today, it's Wednesday, that the owner gave plays to the offense coordinator at some points in the season and said, "Hey, such and such team ran this play on Sunday. Let's run it this week." And um, that I think that's absolutely inexcusable. As an owner, I mean, I understand you're impatient, and you may be an impatient person, which he, from reports are, he is. But your team has to rebuild, and a rebuild does not happen in 10 weeks. Like, you get a new head coach, you get new coordinators, you get a rookie quarterback. You've got to give them time. Like, they need time to develop. They need time to build relationships with each other and the team and the players. Like, so to fire a head coach halfway through the season when you have a rookie quarterback, you just set everything back even more. So I mean, you were looking at a 2 to 3 year rebuild process, and you just started all over. You're starting all over again because now you're going to have to salvage whatever you can the rest of the season. Your first round pick is going to the Bears because you had to move up and get Bryce Young. So you're not getting that first round pick next year, and you're going to bring in a new coach, which is likely going to bring in other new coordinators, and that's a new offense for a second-year quarterback to learn. That's 2 years in a row he's learning new offenses. You've essentially restarted your rebuild process, and it's just the owner needs to do what owners do and sit in the owner's box, give things time. Like if you're not happy with things year two with the head coach or a rookie quarter or young quarterback, that's when you start pulling the trigger to replace people, but not halfway through season one. That's a little bit ridiculous in my opinion. Oh, I gotta chill. Next, we had the Cardinals hosting the Rams. Rams won this game. Uh, excuse me. We had Denver hosting Cleveland. I know Cleveland was playing backup quarterback. I thought Cleveland's defense was better. Apparently, Miles Garrett has some sort of shoulder injury, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I still thought Cleveland's defense would play better and would do enough to help them win the game. And unfortunately, Denver pulled it out. I mean, and I say unfortunately, it's Denver. What Denver's doing is making for a great story in the NFL. I say unfortunately because I had Cleveland picked to win. Denver is now on the longest win streak in the NFL. I believe at one point they were 1-5, and now they are 6-5. So they've rattled off five in a row. They their defense is playing lights out. Their defense is averaging. I mean, I think they've been giving up less than 15, 16 points per game in that stretch. I mean, they've held a lot of teams to a low amount of points. And Russell Wilson is playing the position extremely efficiently. He's got a 4-1 or 5-1 touchdown to interception ratio, best in the league this year. And his stats they're not popping off the charts um, with, um, they're not eye popping stats. Let me put it like that. But they are, let me pull up, I'm pulling up the stats real quick. But he's looking very efficient, and I know I do not have him in my MVP conversation just because his stats are not, um, in general, they're not great stats, but um, essentially, he could somewhatly garner some MVP conversation talks, and Sean Payton should definitely be started. He should be in the conversation for Coach of the Year, especially if Denver continues to run the table, makes playoffs, win a playoff game. I know Dan Campbell's been the odds-on favorite for a while, most of the season, but what Sean Payton is doing in Denver should definitely be considered. So right now, Russell Wilson's at 2,199 yards, and he's thrown 20 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Best ratio in the NFL. Uh, my window is minimized, so I can't quite see his rating. Let me maximize it real quick. Uh, Russell Wilson's rating is 103. That's not the best in the league, but it's also not um, the worst in the league by any means. So that's something to keep eye on Denver going down the stretch. Next, we had the Raiders hosting the Chiefs. Chiefs had a really slow start, got down I think like 14 points early to a pair of Josh Jacobs touchdown runs. They come back, tied it at halftime, and then they pulled it out in the second half. They're still having some offensive issues, but I think they're starting to figure it out. And like I said last week, um, if there's anybody in the league that can figure out and get this offense where it needs to be, it's Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. So I don't have a lot of concerns with Kansas City going forward. Obviously, I'd like to see them continue to improve between now and the end of the season. But Kansas City pulled that win out. Buffalo was on the road in Philadelphia. This was a very exciting game. Buffalo really played well all game. Both quarterbacks had an interception. And I think both of them were more so off of tips, but so I can't fully blame either quarterback. But Josh Allen was by far the best player on the field for 3.5 quarters of the game. In the second half, Jalen Hurts trailing played lights out. Like the last 4 games, they've been down at halftime, and in the second half, he has played lights out. He has not thrown an interception while trailing. He's averaging 140 quarterback rating when trailing in these games. So when the game's on the line and you need your best players to make plays, he has stepped up and he has done nothing but make plays. So um, it is somewhat of a concern that Philly is starting so slow and they're getting behind in every game, but the confidence I have in them to dig themselves out of those holes is just getting stronger and stronger because they've done it 4 weeks in a row against good teams. So they're playing San Francisco this week. They can't afford to get down early to them, so they will have to be on their A game and play good early. A win against San Francisco can ultimately it not anything can happen between now and the end of the season, but winning against San Francisco or winning against Dallas next week, one of those two will almost guarantee Philly the number one seed. So obviously, the win against San Francisco will be crucial because, excuse me, that will give them a head-to-head tiebreak on um, San Francisco if they end up with a tied record. So it will be interesting to see how this game plays out. I've mentioned to somebody this week that I think the NFL has put Philly in a spot that they should not have. I think this is an oversight by the NFL's part. So you have two teams that play on Thursday night every week, and then throughout the season you have 2, 4, or 6 teams on a bye every week. I think the average is 4 teams, but there are weeks with more or less. But ultimately, I think the NFL has done an injustice to Philly because they're playing San Francisco this week, and San Francisco played last Thursday, so they had the mini bye. They've got 10 days to rest, more time for rest, recovery, and treatment for players, more preparation time for coaches, and so that ultimately is not a big deal. But they're playing Dallas next week, who is playing on Thursday this week. So they're playing 2 games back to back, where those teams they're playing are coming off Thursday night games. So they're getting 10 days of rest, while Philly is not. So I don't know. It could have been an oversight that this may have happened earlier in the season to another team. It could have happened in previous years, but I feel like with the schedule in the NFL, there is absolutely no reason that a team should face another like in back-to-back weeks. I do not think any team in the league should face teams that have coming off bye weeks 2 in a row, or a bye week in a Thursday night game, or 2 Thursday night games. I don't. I just there's got to be a way to build that into the algorithm of the schedule and not have that happen. The fact that it's happened to Philly, it's not. I don't think anybody's going to use this as an excuse or anything like that, but Philly is at a disadvantage these next 2 games because of this. And you're coming into the final stretches. You don't want to be at a disadvantage like that, but hey, if Philly pulls one of these 2 games out, almost essentially locks up the 1 seed, you know, great for them. Um, Ultimately, they can still get the 1 seed losing both of these. They can still win the division losing both of these. So I think Philly's going to be okay. I think they're capable of winning one of these two. They're underdog this week at home hosting San Francisco. And if we know anything about Philadelphia, um, from back when they won the Super Bowl, I believe in 2017 season was the Super Bowl that they won, is in January of 18 or February of 18. They were home underdogs every playoff game that year, and they really embraced that underdog mentality. The city, you know, the city embraces that underdog mentality. So, if anything, them being an underdog at home, it's something that they could use to fire themselves up, and we'll see how good they can be and how good they are against San Francisco, because these are the 2 best teams in the NFC this week. The late game, we had Baltimore on the road against the Chargers, both coming off bad losses last week, I believe. No, Baltimore won last week. They beat Cincinnati last week, but the Chargers coming off a bad loss to Green Bay late in the fourth quarter. But ultimately, Baltimore outplayed the Chargers. Chargers committed several turnovers, mostly fumbles, but wasn't a particularly pretty game for either team. Baltimore is in, you know, a they're 9-3. I believe they have a bye week this week, so bye weeks should be done after this week, I believe. So everyone should be on an even playing field the rest of the year when it comes to record and stats. But Baltimore has got a stranglehold on their division lead, and a lot of teams are starting to get those strangleholds on their divisions. We'll go over that in just a second. Um, and then the Monday night game, I picked Chicago to upset the Vikings. This was in Minnesota, so it was a road game for Chicago. It's not a pretty game. They kicked 4 field goals, one as almost as time expired, very late in the fourth quarter to take a 12-10 lead, and they were able to hold on and win that game. This brought my weekly picks up to 12-4. This brings my yearly record up to 120-59. So I am just a small decimal point over 66%. I am happy about that. We're going to try to maintain that 66 to 70% range the rest of the year. And now we'll talk about some of these playoff pushes. So, standings wise, Miami has 2-game lead on Buffalo, and unless Miami just falls apart down the stretch, Miami should hold on, win that division. Buffalo currently is sitting in the 10 spot for playoff for the wild card, so they are several spots out. So I do not think they're going to be able to make a wild card. They're going to have to win the division, which I don't see happening at this point. Baltimore has a 2-game lead on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh and Cleveland are tied and are in the wild card positions right now at 7-4. But again, with Cleveland's quarterback situation being a carousel, they could easily fall out of playoff contention due to that. And Jacksonville secured a stranglehold on the AFC South, beating Houston. They have a 2-game lead on Indianapolis, and I think Jacksonville will hold on and win that. And Denver is creeping up on Kansas City. They still have a 2-game lead on Denver, but Kansas City, currently in the lead, should hold on because they have a fairly favorable schedule the rest of the way. But Denver is creeping up. I believe Denver in the final weeks of the season. Let me pull up their schedule. They're playing Houston this week, which is a team in the wild card race. They play the Chargers, the Lions, Patriots, Chargers, and Raiders. So outside of the Lions, every single one of them games is winnable, and I think the Lions is a winnable game, even though it's on the road. Denver could easily end up 12-5 at the end of the season and be in the wild card spot. For the NFC, Philly still has 2-game lead over Dallas. That's notable because Dallas wins this week, Philly loses. There's one game separating them, and then they play next week in Dallas. And if Dallas wins, that puts them tied. But Philly will still have the tiebreakers due to conference record, because Philly's only loss has been to a AFC team. So if they lose both games to San Francisco and Dallas, they'll have 2 conference losses, where Dallas has 3, and Philly will maintain the tiebreaker over Dallas. Detroit currently a 2-game lead over Minnesota, 3-game lead over Detroit. Green Bay could uh, move up, like I said, into a wild card spot because they play both the Vikings and the Bears to end the season, and the Green Bay also plays the Giants, the Bucks, and the Panthers, all winnable games. They play the Chiefs this week, not a winnable game, but if they play better against the Chiefs and their defense, I will be confident Green Bay can run the table the last 4 or 5 games, and 4 games, I believe. No, it's 5, and then make a playoff push. So with Minnesota's quarterback situation, if they start dropping a game or two, Green Bay will jump them for that wild card spot, and then Green Bay has tiebreakers over Seattle, or can have tiebreakers over Seattle, and Seattle potentially could lose their next 3 and almost fall out of wild card contention. Uh, NFC South, you got 2 teams tied at 5-6, Saints and Falcons. Falcons currently leading the division. Tampa Bay a game behind. That division's still up for grabs, but I mean technically the 1-10 Panthers could win the division still. So that's going to be a team with a losing record hosting a playoff game. Only had that happen a few times in the league. And then lastly, San Francisco has a stranglehold on the West, couple game lead over Seattle, and they have some fairly winnable games to wrap up the season. So San Francisco should be primed to take the 1 or the 2 seed. So just some things to look out for over the next few weeks. We will jump on here, or actually, I'm picking Dallas in the Thursday night game to beat Seattle. I don't think there's much need for discussion of that, but I'll jump up here on here over the weekend, get my Sunday picks in, and we'll go over the Thursday night game. In the meantime, have a good week, everybody.